great. Hey, we just had a friend show up, Steve. Hey, Steve.
Hey there.
So full transparency, everybody. Number one, I'm sick as a dog. I've had this 101, 102 degree fever for 2 days, so I'm pretty loopy. So much so that I forgot that we were bringing Steve on today. So my bad, because like I said, I'm like not fully myself. Whoa, Jesse will be right back. Apparently Jesse didn't want to stay here with us. So
no, he's adding his LinkedIn audience. Yeah.
There he is.
There we go.
There we go. So, hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's ad-lib version of Team Tim. Today's February 2nd. Like, where the heck did, January, poof, gone, already into February.
Punxsutawney Phil, right?
I know. I feel like Groundhog Day, like being sick over and over again for the last 48 hours. But so, Steve, welcome. Before we kind of get into that, I'll just say my hello, and then I'm going to try to not talk so that I'm not being too loopy for everybody. But I'm Tim Golden, founder of Compliance Scorecard. Yes, I have my Pepe shirt on today and not my Compliance Scorecard because, as you know, I'm a new grandfather and they call me Pepe. And I'm just like, oh, I get to see the granddaughter if I'm not too sick. So anyways, Tim Golden, founder of Compliance Scorecard, our good friend, Tim Schnurr. Hey, Tim, take a second.
Just getting off mute. Tim, thank you. Tim Schnurr, channel security guy looking for a new role. Been having some great conversations in the last couple of weeks here, but excited to continue working on outsourced IT and vendors and with MSPs in the channel. So this is where we kind of put it all together. Tim, we actually did put a post out. Steve, sorry I forgot about you, but we have a couple things we'll touch on today, and I think we can hit those three topics as well. But certainly want to talk about Steve and all the good things that channel programs bringing and making it easier for MSPs to find good vendors or vendors with their capabilities they're looking at. And so, Jesse, why don't you go?
Hey everyone, Jesse Miller, founder of Power PSA Consulting. We help MSPs scale their security programs and do it efficiently and profitably. I am also excited to be here today because I thought when Steve first started his Rocket MSP podcast, the way he was bringing vendors on and just letting them say their piece and doing the things that we all don't want to do, right, is take those meetings and listen to the demos and get on the email list. I thought it was really cool what he's doing. And then this latest announcement of acquisition by Channel Program is just, I think, another step in the right direction for the industry and the vendor ecosystem. So again, excited to get into this. And Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing.
Absolutely. Well, hi everyone. I'm Steve Taylor. I am the channel content producer. I gotta get used to saying that. I got a fancy title now, but I'm the channel content producer with Channel Program. I've been an IT professional since 2002. I started my own MSP in 2009. I started making content for MSPs back in 2017. And this is just another evolution of that. Now I get to work on content full time, and I'm super stoked.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I know, Steve, you and I have been trying to connect back at Rocket MSP to kind of, as a vendor, come on there and do what we were talking about. So what is that going to look like at Channel Program? Because, we have been kind of part of Channel Program here, at least myself as a vendor, for a while now. And, we're noticing some really good, fun things coming out of Channel Program.
Yeah, so I'm still trying to figure it all out, to be completely honest. But what I can tell you is I still have a bunch of guests booked into May for the Rocket MSP podcast. We're starting demo days next week. So every Friday, I will be going live with a vendor. And it's going to be deeper dives into demos than even the Rocket MSP podcast was. I'm really excited about that. And then I've got some other content that I'll be doing. Like Monday, I'm going to go live with Garrett Brown. And basically every Monday at 2, we're going to talk about the stack charts. So this Monday, we'll talk about the stack chart that gets released over the weekend. So just lots of opportunities for me to get in front of people.
Nice. So we were going to talk a little bit today about like the non-compete stuff, some CIS controls. Yeah, Tim wants to stir the pot more on my conversation around eco chamber. But before we get into that, I want to share something pretty interesting that our good friend Jay McBean put out here. So let's see. So Jay, we all know Jay, right? Jay's got all the data. He's the person, right? Let me bump this up a wee bit, right? He's got let's get rid of that out of the way. Yay. And then, hey, how about some ads? But he's got all the data, right? And when we look at, what are the predictions from Canalist going forward, right? And all the things that are happening, like, is there a number there that kind of sticks out for anybody? If I kind of pull this up real quick, is there anything that really sticks out there?
Well, I think it's interesting, and that's why, I sent this to you, Tim, is because I thought it was very interesting that 60% growth for MSPs in 2024 in compliance. Now, I think it's really interesting too, and I've been saying this for a long time, is that MSP, managed service provider business, is a little bit counter-cyclical, right? So when you see downturns in the economy and people are tightening their belts, typically they look for ways to save, and an MSP can usually be that, especially for mid-market organizations. But I think it's really interesting that, we see a 12% growth in the industry in a downturn, which is awesome. But then we also see a 60% growth in an emerging kind of space for MSPs. So I think, and that's more than just an echo chamber, right? So maybe that's a good segue to talk about that. But I think I do think sometimes in the community we can get really talk about the same things all the time, and we are in our own little echo chamber or bubble, whatever you want to call it. But I don't think 60% growth, that's a little bit too big. That's market driven, right? People are asking about compliance. People are asking about strategy. So that's my take on it, at least.
Yeah, and in full transparency, yes, we are a compliance company, and hey, foreshadowing or foresight or whatever. But Jay McBean, for those that don't know, I'll drop the link in chat so you all have it. Like him and what they're doing over at Catalyst, they have the data. They know these predictions, right? They do the research, like way smarter than any of us around this stuff. And for them to come out and say, 50% here, 30% there, yada, yada, yada. But that big number of 60% kind of really stuck out for me, because when you're looking at a downturn economy, there's room for growth, right? There's room to operationalize stuff. There's room to, generate more business and become a true business partner as an MSP with your customers.
Yep. Tim, it's interesting, right? Because Tim Golden, myself met almost 2 years ago, right? And we were both compliance-driven vendors in the ConnectWise Pitcher program, right? And people are like, what are you guys doing? Like, I don't really get it. And 60% is a really interesting number, Jesse, because compliance isn't typically delivered. Like, you can't just turn on compliance, and it's very manual intensive, right? Like, you're interviewing people, you're creating policies, you're creating a structure, a long-term roadmap. So I think that's amazing. That number is shocking to me. But it also tells you that it's not going to all be, it's going to be somewhat tool-based, right? There's going to be automation, there's going to be roadmaps, there's going to be all the things that you preach, right? ICP driven, right? Like, so you're not kind of like recreating, a custom cybersecurity plan for each customer or client that you're using. So I think, it just shows you that all these tools have entered the market. Certainly on the enterprise space, there's Vantage, Rata, SecureFrame. Like, these guys are $2 billion unicorns. I mean, it's crazy. So some of that stuff's coming down market. I was probably a little early in my older Port Mesa company, but they're doing really well right now in compliance with with some of the things that are going on in the market. And Tim, obviously, we're not supposed to talk vendors here, but it's okay when I can, as long as you don't talk about, you're talking about your own vendor, right? So, just if anyone was there at the MSP Geek Conference last year, we were kind of competing, like, how do we pitch compliance, right? Like, right. I was like, Tim's got this very ingenious kind of like, let's start with policy, right? Let's start with the basics. Let's start with policy lifecycle and get people on board with that. And so anyway, just some observations in the market. And I've been lucky enough to actually sit in on some demo calls, and the level of understanding of compliance and what it takes to do things is just unbelievable how far most of these MSPs have come along. So before, it was just a difficult conversation, like which framework. And I'm sure Tim has these demos every day of like, we want to do this. We want to do CIS controls for this set of customers. We want to do, a HIPAA overlay or a SOC 2 overlay or whatever it is. But just the level of understanding and go-to-market in terms of compliance. So anyway,
I'd like to hear. So Steve, you've talked to a lot of MSPs, right, over the last year or two or three, right? Probably a couple hundred, if I had to guess, right? Has there been any thematic things or themes amongst the MSPs as it relates to some of Jay's predictions here about co-managed, about growth and compliance, about AI and that kind of stuff? Have you seen in your conversations, either discussing with MSPs or vendors as a whole, anything around those?
I think it really depends on the maturity level of the MSP. So the smaller MSPs, and you got to realize, with Rocket MSP, I was really focused on tools, right? And let's be honest, like a lot of the less mature MSPs are more focused on tools than they are with processes. So I find myself speaking with the less operationally mature ones, and that's okay, because they need help, and they'll get there, right? So with the kind of MSPs that I'm talking to, they're more excited about like playing with AI for marketing and just like little things. They're not getting involved with building their own custom OpenAI inside of Azure that's based on other tickets to help them triage and everything else, right?
Yeah.
They're also typically not going to be as strong when it comes to coding and scripting and all that. So they're going to rely on third-party platforms in order to be able to do things. So whether it's what do you call it, robotic process automation, or RPA, or some of the other things out there. I don't want to name names because I don't know how you guys are on the show, but you guys could.
We can't plug ourselves, but you can plug other people.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, they look at things like Roost and MSP bots and all these other things, and they're definitely looking for ways to automate what they're doing. I don't really see a lot of the more immature MSPs really worrying about compliance, because they're still not necessarily following a framework or a set of controls for their clients as it is, even just for best practices. So heaven forbid they look into something like CMMC. That's a bear,
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that. And I was guessing, or I was hoping you would talk about that, right, as the different levels and the different maturity, because we see, so from that perspective, we see the rest of the industry more than half, or a 60% growth curve. That's a hockey stick curve as far as I'm concerned, right? And you have smaller MSPs and you have other MSPs sitting here say, well, what do I do about this? I'm becoming more commoditized and I'm becoming pushed into a corner even more. And I think that chart actually speaks to it, Tim. If you have it and you want to pull it back up, I think it said something like 50% of MSPs plan to partner for services they don't offer today. And so I think that speaks to there's becoming a much more open and cross-pollinating community. And I think that's important. I think that's a good thing overall. So
let me pull it up full screen and kind of do a little here, see if I can, without blowing me too up, right? They're going to experience some growth, either co-managed or co-partnering, generative AI, across vendors, tracking 35,000 vendors. Whoa, right?
Yeah. Is that coincidence that 50% plan to co-partner and 60% plan to grow in compliance? It sounds like they're partnering with compliance partners to do that. Now, I don't want to read into the data too much or put words in anybody's mouth.
I can't believe that 50% MDR number. I mean, even the majority of MSPs are already using MDR, so I'm shocked that it would be growing to that degree. I mean, what are your thoughts, right? How often do you find an MSP that doesn't have an MDR partner?
So, well, it depends. Again, we're looking at operational maturity, right? So, I mentioned earlier that there's a bunch of the less mature MSPs that aren't doing things based on a set of controls or a framework. So those MSPs are still relying on, I'll call it old school antivirus techniques, where they install WebRoot or something along those lines, and they're not using the more advanced tech yet. Because it scares them. They don't know what they don't know, and it's overwhelming, and they don't want to get in over their head, so they stick with what they know. And unfortunately, that puts them further and further behind.
It's interesting. It sounds like there's a bit of a gold rush in the vendor space there, right? So 50% plan to grow, and you're saying these MSPs, it's kind of it's a bit of a gray box for them. A lot of them getting into these types of offerings. How are you seeing vendors be successful, or what should MSPs be looking for in a vendor if they're going out and finding these services? What are you seeing in good partners? Because I think you have a pretty good view, high level, of the ecosystem today.
You asking me?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yep, Steve, for you.
No, it's okay. So I'm sorry. Ask the question again.
So what are you seeing from vendors that are being really successful and really enabling MSPs and being good partners to MSPs? So what are some characteristics of a good partner that you're seeing?
Fantastic onboarding, hand-holding within the onboarding process to make sure that the MSP understands what it is, what it does, how it works, all that. And then honestly, like a lot of these unified cybersecurity platforms, while they may not be able to go that inch wide, mile deep, they really do seem to cover a lot, at least of the basics for these MSPs. And I really think that they should be looking at some of these companies like Guards or Judy or the other one, Covalence by Field Effect. Like some of these companies, like I haven't used it, so I can't tell you if it's going to stop all the threats and protect all your clients, but I can tell you that it's a more holistic approach. It's a more turnkey system, and something like that I think is, I don't know, probably really, really beneficial, especially because we just launched I'll go on a little tangent. We just launched our vendor contract thing. How much better is it for you to only have like one contract with a security vendor instead of 20, because you're working with 20 different security vendors?
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of came up with a phrase because I was talking through this in detail over the last couple of months, and it goes, the efficacy of the whole is better than the peak of the parts, right? So when you're talking about economies of scale and an ecosystem that you're able to deliver a holistic umbrella of security for your clients, I think, like you said, there's something to be said about having an ecosystem that all works and operates together. You talk about, yeah, go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to say, so I'm going to talk about myself a little bit, but I'm going to relate it appropriately. So the average MSP has what, 20, 25 tools, 27 tools, right? We're very tool heavy. The challenge that we've seen in the ecosystem is that none of those tools talk to each other. Right. There's no standardized thing. There's no, like, we're building out all these integrations, and I'm working with platform A, platform P, and like how they define asset in one platform, it's called asset_device. And another platform, it's called configuration. And another platform, it's just called asset. And we're like, there's no standardization anywhere in any of these MSPs tools and whatnot. So as we're starting to look at that and working with great partners like Lion Guard, and I could ramble, Michelle at Lion Guard really did a great job on one of her recent LinkedIn posts summarizing, well, her thoughts and kind of my thoughts a little bit too, is that we can be better together, right? As vendors, helping MSPs actually not only be, protecting themselves, but protecting their customers. And there should be, at least in my opinion, more collaboration across vendors, because at the end of the day, we're all here to serve the MSP, and those MSPs are here to serve our end customer, right? And so the ecosystem idea, like Jay McBean says this all the time, like Salesforce doesn't make their money off selling Salesforce. Salesforce makes their money from everybody else that ties into Salesforce, right? And so as an ecosystem, not to be confused with echo chamber, we'll get to that a little later.
Vendor at, yeah.
We'll get to that a little later. All of us working together so that we can be better together.
Well, that's a huge piece that I'd love to see. And I talked to, I've talked to you about this, Tim. I've talked to other GRC vendors about this. Is the whole recommendation part needs to be tied in. When I have recommendations or gaps coming out of a tool, that should integrate with my CRM and my sales process to be able to put an SQL back into the system and have an account manager take that and run with it. And that shouldn't be a send you an email and hopefully you put it in, or maybe there's a Zapier configured and we get something in there but it doesn't get action, right? I feel like there's a lot of room for improvement in that particular little piece of the process.
Yeah, there's two posts. There's two posts that went on. So Kyle Spooner said something about tool utilization recently, and it's interesting, right? And then I don't want to do it, but GRC products are you need another tool to manage your other tools, right? It gets to be. But it does. I mean, if they're workflows, you just mentioned Roost, right? Automation of all the different things. What does Roost do, right? Look, Roost does service desk automation. They probably integrate with CyberFox and CyberQP, IAM, right? Password reset, things like that. So as you said, these things have to play together. It's interesting, Tim, and we've had some pretty heated arguments, I guess, recently. Blue ocean, red ocean, these terms that Matt Lee, or I don't know who, I heard him talk about, I don't know if it came from that, but there's certain parts of the MSP vendor ecosystem that are new and some of them that are extremely mature and they're fighting for established market share that's not going to grow. That chart you just showed us, clearly there's a ton of growth for everyone, so why fight about it? Things like compliance, things like AI. I want to say IAM was more last year, and PAM and things like that, where it was a growing market. I think it probably still is growing, but certain areas are more red ocean and certain areas are blue ocean, where people should just be rising the tide. Compliance is absolutely blue ocean, where all the GRC vendors, all the people out there talking about how do I even think about selling this as an MSP? Jesse, you're working with the GRC guys as well. So I think it's a little different. I don't think there's a lot of red ocean, but there's a little bit, obviously, even the EDR, MDR spaces, it's hard for them to differentiate themselves. So
there are, again, because I talk about it all the time, I get hit up by almost every vendor out there that's got a GRC tool. So there's a lot of them out there. Let's put it out there.
Yeah, there are.
It's it might be the year that the ocean starts to turn a little red.
Yeah. Well, there are different price points as well. The unicorns that I mentioned before are anywhere from 10,000 or something per end company, and then there's cheaper ones that are certainly way more affordable, a tenth of the price. So, and then there's people that are doing kind of VCIO and things like that, right? You're starting to overlap a little bit in terms of where does the best practice kind of meet a framework or something like that, and then evidence it. So,
well, I think so. Go ahead, yeah.
So now I was just going to say, Steve said in multiple different iterations, that operationally mature or not operationally mature MSP. right? And, we all talk about this, across the sphere of follow a framework, start something, do like you hear me say that all the time, right? So things like CIS is a really good starting point for yourself, right? Doing these exercises internally, CompTIA Trustmark, right? Like getting your own house in order, drinking your own champ, all of that stuff. But here's the thing, it's pretty easy for you to be able to start getting into that, because you can literally walk over to CIS and download a Excel file. Although it's not very operationally mature to do it that way, you can go in and just start doing it that way. So I always say, start somewhere, do something, pick a framework and go, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Even CIS, right? It's so hard to stay, to your point, it's so hard to stay up to date with. Tim, you talked about, you're like, oh, IAM was last year, right? I'm like, but who's even doing that, right?
Yeah,
it's very there's a very small subset that's doing that well and actually having the governance piece of that, right? But it's like, oh, we're not talking about that anymore. We're talking about AI. We're talking about GRC. So I think it's important to make a differentiation between what's getting customer clicks and what's actually getting customer value, because they can be two different things, although they're linked, right? So yes, we should be talking GRC. Yes, we should be talking compliance, but we should make sure that we have those IAM systems. We're performing the governance. We're doing the work on the back end. And that goes to speak to what Steve was talking about with the operational maturity. So I think it's just, again, it's easy to get kind of swept up in the zeitgeist of what we're all talking about right now. But we do have to remember that it's not the next big thing, and that's old. It's just, that's not what's in the news cycle, right? So we need to make sure that we're doing the needful for our clients, while also, yes, being aware, being able to talk and speak to what's getting marketing leads into the business, right? So.
Yep. So the only reason I put CIS in the title here, and we talked about it a little bit, is just still the same story, still the same great guidance.
Yeah.
It's a very prescriptive framework. It starts with the number one control, or it's prioritized from the top. Clearly, there'll be some controls maybe that aren't applicable, as Jesse talks about ICPs, and some of them are more applicable to others.
Right.
But just the explosion in the channel, right? Like, it's really we've got another podcast coming up here in a couple weeks talking about the CIS vendor mapping, which will really help cut some of the noise. And I don't know if channel program is gonna do that, but Steve basically. Matt Lee, PAX 8, really driving this initiative to talk about vendor capabilities and mapping them back to CIS controls in a very judicious and even to some degree audited perspective of like how those capabilities of those vendors actually map to the controls. So that's really where I want to bring up CIS. Like, it's still the same old story. And Jesse said, like, are you still doing that? There's IAM, maybe it's gone, but are you still doing it the way like CIS tells you to do it? So, I think we could leave it there. But anything else on CIS, Tim?
No, I mean, I feel like we've beat CIS to death. Just go somewhere, grab the thing, start doing IG1. Do you even know, as an MSP, where all your own assets are? And not just hardware devices, not just things that are plugged into the internet, right? That you can get an IP address from.
Mm-hmm.
But what about your phones? What about your people, right? Any of that kind of stuff. What about the Roomba down the hall because you're working from home and that Roomba gets hacked, right?
Yeah.
I said this a couple of weeks ago. I went and grabbed Run Zero to test it out and play with it. Free little thing you can actually, get free insight from runzero.com. And I ran it internally, and I'm just like, oh, I did know 99.99% of the stuff that was here, but now I actually know, and now I can actually deal with them all appropriately. So start with 1.1. Where's your stuff? And does that stuff in your home office actually tie into everything in your house, right? Or are you segregating those networks? So as far as CIS, it's an easy enough framework, loose term, easy enough framework to start with.
Yeah, there's some good resources. CyberCall did 16 episodes, 18 episodes, one on each episode. interesting thing with this, be on the lookout for this vendor mapping as it develops. They're developing charts on how to like read the control and understand it. Like, where's the data flow? Does it relate to other controls? That's going to be pretty awesome when those things come out.
So one of the things I kind of want to roll a grenade into the room here a little bit. And who knows, maybe you guys will change my mind. But I often find that MSPs lack the in-house expertise and resources to provide the comprehensive cybersecurity services that will meet compliance regulations and standards.
Yeah.
And often building out that infrastructure is gonna, I don't know that I would use the term distract, but it'll definitely put a strain on the MSP's core competencies. What do you guys think about maybe instead of MSPs trying to do all things IT, what if we took the lawyer approach and we had, well, here's the company that specializes in cyber, here's the company that specializes in Office 365, so on and so forth, where now they start to really specialize in doing something really great, and let's be honest, probably be able to charge a heck of a premium because they're going to be so knowledgeable at that one really awesome thing.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Get that grenade, Jesse. This is a good one.
No, this is good. And I don't disagree with that. And I think it goes back to that statistic we were looking at. Is MSPs there's a 50% of them plan to partner for services they don't offer in their core competency and work together. So I think that statistic was speaking to exactly what you're saying. And Zach from Fort Mesa, Tim, actually put a post, or he replied to a comment on my post that really stuck in my head the other day about how retail fast food places are doing fortressing, right? So it's this concept of they all attack a market together, and like Chipotle, Panda Express, all these places all say, hey, we don't overlap or compete necessarily, although we all offer food. We offer different specialty types of food, and we're all going to put in shops around each other because we know that it's going to be better for to actually attract a bigger customer base over the course of time. And so I think that fortressing approach, Steve, is actually a good way to think about it. And I think that's important. And I also say that's why it depends on your operational maturity. Yes, I do believe every single MSP should offer vCISO services. You still have to convince me how you can offer a security program without strategy. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not going to be successful, or it'll be marginal at best, right? In my opinion.
Step 3 is question marks, and step 4 is profit. That's all I know.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's a great episode, actually. But that's the thing, right? Is so if there are question marks, Burger King the market, right? What does Burger King do? They wait till McDonald's.
Baby.
McDonald's they develop a market, and then Burger King moves in once it's been proven out. And I have MSPs. That's why we actually launched a vCISO service that we're offering for MSPs at our PSA, because of that exact need. Is we'd go in and build these programs out for MSPs, and they'd say, or MSPs would come to us and say, hey, it's great. We get the margins there, we get it, but it's a huge outlay in people, expense, and processes to take that risk. So what do? We'd rather just buy that. It's the build versus buy. We'd rather just buy that, have you deliver it to our clients. Our employees can learn and start to get acclimated to that ecosystem down the road. And then when we've developed a customer base that's big enough and sustains the outlay and the risk to go build that team, then we'll do it, right? So that was a long-winded response to your grenade you rolled in the room, but I wanted to kind of try and flush that out. So I don't know if that answers your question, if that's kind of how you think about it, but I'd love to hear your take too.
And I just said, don't you miss a good shopping mall?
They're still around. It's more of like the suburban sprawl shopping malls now, right?
Yeah, the good ones, like inside, the ones you can walk for miles.
Yeah. There's still a few. We got the biggest one here in Minnesota still.
Yeah.
Oh, funny.
So, what other topics were on our list today? Because I'm fading quick.
Yeah, so I'll just briefly go through non-competes, but big law, New York State non-competes are kind of out the window. California, they've been out the window. Other states, they're coming along. So where does that leave employers, right? Like, and Tim, you could jump in here, but we've been talking about IP. We can talk about insider threat. Like, if you're doing those programs well, a lot of the statutes that you put in on employers, like, oh, if you create, the sales list, it's the property of the firm, or things like that. There's certainly ways around, not ways around, but ways you should be doing them in the first place that non-competes shouldn't really be relevant. So
yeah, I think non-competes were overly punitive in general. So I'm glad to see them go, to be frank. As an employee, I always kind of felt that they were unfair. And now that I own a business, there is that concern that says, what if this contractor decides to work direct with this customer, or this, the reality is that that's just not going to happen if you're doing your job well, right? The whole idea of collaborative, and I think in the growth mindset that we are as an industry in general these days, I just see that being less of an issue. I don't know. Maybe I'm, too starry-eyed still, but I just don't see it as a real problem. And like you said, Tim, the way that I've been at least advised to go about it is exactly what you said. Is you protect your intellectual property and you make sure that work's done or works for hire, right? And you make that clear that if you're coding something, or if you're building something, that's the intellectual property of this firm. And yes, then I think it's fair, because you can't take this intellectual property that I paid to develop and go use it somewhere else. However, you are free to go over to the next door and build more intellectual property, right? So I think it's the right way, and I think it's a step in the right direction. In my personal
it's beautifully put. Yeah, thanks, Jesse.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I just brought up a couple of things here. Oops, let me put that over there. So FTC talking about non-competes. Even me here in New Hampshire, where I'm from, like non-competes, right, in favor of federal government, right? And so the point that you just made about like intellectual property, right? So there's a piece of that I feel like can and should be protected, right? But there's also the wanting my staff to stick around. And I think that boils down to like good company culture, right? If you foster good company culture and you put in some guardrails and some safeguards to make sure IP doesn't leave, then chances are, how do I say this? If you have a crappy company with a crappy culture and you get disgruntled employees, it's probably gonna like people taking your stuff and going to the next guy because you're not willing to take care of them. Yeah, that comes from having a strong company culture where you invest in your employees, you invest in your customers, and you put those safeguards in place.
Yeah. Well, here's a great example. I was talking with a client of mine. One of their people was on the GRC team at a big bank for years, right? And he was talking about how, we had these great, processes and everything. He's like, I would have loved to use them, but the minute you downloaded something to your personal computer, they would know and you'd be fired that day. So that's the way to protect against that stuff, is an intellectual property and IP protection program, right? So.
Yeah, and the tools, as you said, Jesse, to catch that. So if people understand that these rails are in place, like they'll play by the rules. And but as Tim said, it's also a little bit like respect and is a two-way street. So
it's a combination of all things, right? So a little bit of carrot, a little bit of stick.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Steve, anything to add on that? I saw you peek up there.
So I'll be honest. I don't like non-competes. I got dinged in my past thanks to a non-compete, and it wasn't. And the interesting thing is, it wasn't even an employer-employee non-compete. I'm not going to say anything more about that, but I'm not a fan. But I do think that this does open it up. Like, let's say you join a group, and you decide you want to make a group like it but better. Do they have the ability to go after you because the non-compete clause ban, or You know what I mean? So like,
Right.
I think they're opening up a gray area here, and it's going to be one of those things where I don't think it's going to stick, because I think enough people are going to lobby, big business, and it's not going to stick.
Yeah, I think the other thing is they're asking for, a lot of times in contracts, they're just not legally enforceable anyway. But why put them in the contracts and kind of like lay that down on an employee? I think that's, I don't know, just some people, a lot of these contracts are just miswritten, and they're asking for things because they can get away for asking things because people need to work and people need jobs, and they'll sign things which probably aren't fair all the time. So
yeah, I was just thinking about that, Tim, the other day, and not even in relation to what we're talking about today, but I was kind of rolling that around and saying, well, yeah, it could get to a point where it's completely unenforceable. But people are still going to put it in the contract, because the typical employee is not going to have the resources or maybe the know-how to even fight it, right? So it's like, oh yeah, okay, you'll win out in court, but we're going to take you to court for it anyway. So you want to do that? It's like, again, I think that's a terrible way to go about doing business, but I was thinking that's probably the way it ends up, right, at the end of the day. So
yeah. Cool. Well, I could talk about non-competes. I'm working on a little white paper on insider threat, but there's not there's not a ton of aspects. Non-competes or contractual language is certainly one aspect of, like I said, you need to set expectations and have, respect for going a two-way street. But at the same time, like these ridiculous non-competes are not only, they seem to be illegal, but they're also ineffective. So how can you have an effective and productive and profitable relationship with your employees is, kind of where we're going.
Yeah. So I want to kind of just change course real quick here, because as we were talking about the CIS, there's still some issues, I think, nothing's ever going to be perfect, but I wanted to talk to people about, as you start to go out and use the CIS to do risk evaluations and things on your customers, you don't have to go exactly off the letter of every control in CIS. And one of the biggest bones I have to pick with CIS is the end user training, Control 14. I think it's overly long and complicated, and I think I've got an idea. I'm going to share my screen and people can screenshot it and see if this works for them. And they also, here's the other thing, they also don't have a split between fish testing and end user training. It just says you should train on these 7 categories. So here's my proposed change to the rule.
Jesse, this will be even more controversial. I don't even think you need CIS Control 14, because if you make the systems rock solid.
All right. Fair point.
Me, if you work in a big company, a big bank, like, you could not have cybersecurity awareness training and literally be fine. But,
fair point. And and that's the thing, is because if you're building a risk percentage out of the CIS controls and you have all these listed out, okay, you get know before, or whatever vendor you're using for that, or breach secure now, or fin security, any one of these, you put them in there, you do your training, and we just got like a 10 percentage point boost in our risk score because we can answer yes to all these. But did we actually get 10% more secure? No. So I think shrink the number of questions. Are we doing fish testing? Are we doing training with all these things? And if we can't say yes to all these things, it's only a partial. And then are we training our developers and our specialized roles on things and specifically about their jobs? Those 3 things you can answer. So again, I love the CIS. It's still my favorite framework, but it's okay to color outside the lines a little bit, I guess I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, we had the stack debate too. Like we certainly have different perspectives on what's like really critical and what's not critical, or even throw it out. So
yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, I literally did this the other day. It's a numbers game. It's a math problem, right? So check all the boxes for CIS 14, and the rest of our numbers are skewed because I have all these greens. And when you look at the overall average, like I did this the other day, like I was trying to work on some KPIs and blah, 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 blah. And I'm putting numbers together, and I went into Excel and I hit average. Well, I had like 12 12 columns that were set to 0.
Yeah.
So when you do an average, quote, quote, and you have 40 numbers, but half of them are 0, like it just totally screws the math all up. And I was like, oh, that's why that doesn't. So same thing here, right? So
yeah. That's
you know,
why
7 or 8.
that's why pinwheels are good, right? Like the pinwheel graphs are good. So
Yeah, risk dollars are extremely limited. So how are you going to deploy them in the most, and still have reasonableness met when the boogeyman comes to get you, right? So the SEC or whoever it is.
Yeah. Steve, I'm interested, and I wanted to ask you this earlier, and we're kind of hopping all over the place here, but from your chair, obviously you get to talk to a lot of MSPs. You see kind of and you mentioned you might be talking to less mature MSPs on the whole. What are they asking about? What do they want to know about?
Oh, what do they want to know about? That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, it's everything from, I get emails asking me what RMM and PSA they should be using.
Yeah.
I mean,
At least once a day.
yeah. And then that's such an open question. So if you guys have ever been a part of a group called BNI, it's a referral network, and when I ran my MSP, I was in one for like 5 years, and they always say, don't say you want anyone with a computer because the brain just goes, well, everyone has a computer, so I'm not going to refer anyone to you because I can't think of a single person.
Right.
And I feel like you just gave me that question, like, oh golly, like what are MSPs asking you about? Like, gosh, what aren't they asking me about? I've got guys asking me about what PSA and RMM they should use to, how do I do this with RPA? To why is this tool so expensive? Like, I don't know, I didn't write it. Like, so I get it's real interesting because I get some characters that reach out to me, and I have so much fun with it.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing that MSPs are worried about right now is cybersecurity.
Yeah.
That continues to be the thing. Like I ran a poll on LinkedIn. I was like, hey, what do you want to see more content of in 2024? And it was like cybersecurity, PSA, RMM, and a couple other things. They only let you do 4 options, right?
Right.
And cybersecurity was like 64%.
Wow.
So that says something, right? That says that they all obviously get it. But I think that on the flip side, they're all starting to get like decision fatigue because there's a new cybersecurity platform every month.
It's ridiculous.
And don't get me wrong, I love the innovation because like every time a new one comes out, it's like they're doing something new and creative, right? It's not like you're getting the same. We don't have 20 web routes. We've got all these different platforms that do different things, and they all have their pros and their cons.
Right.
And it's becoming more and more difficult for MSPs to determine which one of these sucks the least for me, because if you look at it like, I have never found a product that I'm like, this product is perfect, they don't need to change a thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you got to figure out which one sucks the least for you. And I can't tell people like, oh, well, you should go with XYZ platform because I don't know what your process looks like. I don't know what systems you have in place. I don't know if you have systems in place.
Right.
So, yeah.
No, I completely agree with you. And my advice has always been, which one sucks the least? The one you keep the longest and optimize the most. So jumping on to the next one just because it's got 2% better or whatever detection rate, I think it's a fool's errand, right? So picking a stack that has good support and good people that you like working with and listen to you, and then taking it with its warts and improving it and optimizing it for your client base and for your business, I think is the antidote for the fatigue you're talking about, right?
Yeah. And I'll be honest, like I'm guilty, and I and I share my story. When I ran my MSP for the first like 6 years, I was so terrified of doing sales that I would just give myself busy work. So I'd be replacing my tools every 3 to 6 months. I'd be like, "Oh, well, let's try Synchro now. Let's try," and it'd be like I'm looking for this magic thing that, like, I don't know. I guess I was thinking the tools were what were going to define my capabilities, and almost like if the tools have the right features, if you build it, they'll come, right?
Yeah.
But that was never the case. It was always nobody cares. I love this phrase. Nobody cares how the watch is made. They just want to know what time it is.
Yeah.
When you go to a mechanic to get your car worked on, are they going to take you into the shop and be like, "Look at all my Snap-on tools"? Nobody cares if you're using Snap-on or some garbage that's going to break from gosh, what's that place everyone makes fun of?
I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
Harbor Freight.
Harbor Freight, yeah. So as long as
I
the
know.
car gets put back together safely, I don't care what tools you use. So why do MSPs think the customers care what tools we use? They don't.
Yeah, exactly. They want to, they care about how does it help their business make money.
Revenue, risk, and reputation.
There you
And
go.
what's the other one, Jesse?
Regerts.
Regerts.
Yeah.
So we're
That's a
winding
little bit
down
more.
here. We got about 9 minutes left. Typically, we tend to do the one key takeaway, but I think we've kind of been all over the map here today in our conversation.
I see a really awesome question that somebody asked. How far behind are smaller MSP in terms of their stacks?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah.
Can I take a stab at this real quick?
Fire away, my friend.
So, the cool thing is I'll be able to actually have real answers on this, in a couple months, because we've got this Navistack thing that everyone can use, but whatever, right? So what I have found is that the less mature MSPs are so worried about their stack that they're not worried about their process. And it doesn't matter if you're using IT Glue or OneNote, right? I mean, maybe it does, but the more important thing is that you're documenting processes. Now, don't put your passwords in OneNote; that would be dumb. But the more important thing is that you're documenting processes and that you're doing things in a consistent way across the board with all of your clients.
Right.
And by having tool sprawl, this client wouldn't spend as much money on backups, so I have them on this platform, while this other client, they wanted a BCDR, so I've got them on that platform.
Yeah.
I think tool sprawl is probably the bigger problem that we have with some of these less mature MSPs, and the fact that they're just they lack so much confidence when it comes to their own capabilities that they rely on the tools and they just keep adding to the stack.
Yeah. I had somebody post, I think it was, what was that? I think it was, they basically said that every MSP they've seen fail was because of not having pricing discipline. Exactly what you're talking about. Well, they couldn't afford, or they didn't want to pay for this backup, so we just did this custom thing for them, right? And now we just created something separate that we have to support, and it's death by 1,000 cuts when you get to that point, right?
Yeah. So interesting enough, like Tim Golden used to basically achieve FedRAMP, right? Using no tools. And then we know some MSPs that use a ton of tools, maybe 50, 60, 80, and they have incredible stacks. So I don't know, it comes down to, Steve, what you said, processes and procedures and business acumen and even sales sometimes, right? But the stack can differ pretty dramatically, and you can still get a great result. So
well, one of the lessons that I learned talking with our friend Brad Gross, is don't ever call out specific tools or specific things, especially in your contracts, especially line items. And I
Absolutely.
learned that lesson the hard way because I called out security awareness training provided by blah, right, as a line item on the invoice. And what happened? The customer went over to blah and signed up on their own for blah and canceled minute because they could get it for $1 or so cheaper.
Well, not to mention the whole operations and tech debt that you're creating for yourself, that if you do need to switch that tool, you got to switch your SOWs and you got to update everything, and the customer's like, wait, what happened? It's don't do that.
Don't do that.
All right, well, almost closing comments, but Steve, one thing you talked about here is like, or you just talked about, Jesse, like getting a tool, optimizing it. There's thousands of tools, maybe not as many in the channel, but I was talking to Tim about the 20% rule, and it's like, as a vendor, if you might sign up a bunch of customers, say you sign up 100 customers, but only if 20% are actually selling through to more than half of their end customers.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So if you're more than 20%, you're going to make it in the channel. If you're less than 20%, you just have great sales, and you're getting a bunch of these people that are trying tools out and not using them, and you're really just not getting the sell through, right? So channel program, I don't know how much you guys work on this, but as you said, like customer success, that like customer delight, peer groups, right? We've seen some awesome VCIO platforms that do great peer groups. Like getting the MSP to invest their time and actually selling it through to the end customer is that where that metric's from. And I always ask vendors, like, what's your sell-through rate? So it seems like the cream does rise to the top. Like, so you look at all the successful vendors that are dominating Ready Boom and IT Nation and all the great conferences, right? Those are the ones that do have really good sell-through, right? So it's just a matter of like, and it's funny because the channel's very like reputational, like networking, like, oh, what are you using? What are you using? Oh, I'm using that. Like, it seems like the ones that do and get that sell-through, get that like product participation really win. So that's my final.
Final observation and final takeaway all wrapped into one, baby.
That's right.
So with what 2-3 minutes left here, like I said, we've been all over the map today. Key takeaway for today, I guess I would say for me is, if you don't feel well, don't get on a live stream, because I'm totally.
we appreciate you, man. We appreciate you.
Steve, what about you? Do you have a key takeaway from today?
Oh man. No.
That's all right.
I love Steve, by the way, for that. He is just going to give it to you straight every single time,
Perfect.
No, perfect. I honestly, I actually find the non-compete thing really interesting. That's the one that I'm most interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Not any of the cybersecurity stuff, because I'm burned out from cybersecurity. But I think the non-compete is going to be interesting.
Yeah, very interesting indeed.
What about you, Jesse? You always get something.
Yeah, final takeaway. I just think we talk about burnout, and we talk about how much our heads spin in the cyber industry every day. And here's Jesse, Tim, and Tim telling you, oh, you got to get up on GRC now, and that's what people are talking about. So the takeaway is to pick a vendor, pick a tool, pick a client type to iterate on, not your entire client base, and start playing around. Don't be afraid to color outside the lines. And if you're looking at something and you're saying this doesn't make sense, you're probably right, and you should, maybe make a little bit of an adjustment, like we talked about with the CIS. So I think that's the takeaway: is pick a framework, pick a tool, pick a customer, and then optimize, and you're going to have success.
And with that said, next week we have our good friend Jennifer coming over to talk about cybersecurity yet again.
Yay! Hey, we love it, baby.
Exactly.
Yeah, the ship's up show. I mean, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Jennifer's
Awesome.
All right.
people.
So join us same bat time, same bat channel next Friday with Jennifer. We're going to talk cybersecurity stuff as usual and how to sell it. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy your weekend.
Later.
Subscribe now.